Imagine waking up on a beautiful tropical island, spending your day exploring pristine beaches, and then watching as the entire landmass beneath your feet slowly disappears into the ocean as the sun sets. Sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, right? Well, believe it or not, there's a real place where this happens every single day, and the science behind it is absolutely mind-blowing. This is the story of one of Earth's most bizarre geographical phenomena, a place where the line between land and sea becomes so blurred that it ceases to exist for half of every day. And trust me, by the time we're done here, you'll understand why this vanishing act has fascinated scientists, confused sailors, and created one of the most unique ecosystems on the planet. The island we're talking about isn't your typical volcanic formation or coral atoll. It's what's known as a tidal island. And to really appreciate how insane these places are, we need to understand what makes them tick. A tidal island is basically a piece of land that's connected to the mainland or appears as an island depending on the state of the tide. During low tide, you can literally walk across dry land to reach it. But when high tide rolls in, that same pathway becomes completely submerged under several feet or even meters of seawater, effectively cutting off the island from everything around it. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so it's just a sandbar that gets covered by water. What's the big deal? But here's where it gets absolutely wild. We're not talking about a few inches of water creeping over some sand. Some of these tidal islands experience such extreme tidal ranges that entire landscapes, complete with rocks, vegetation, and even human structures, completely vanish and reappear twice every single day. While there are tidal islands scattered around the world, perhaps none is more famous or dramatic than Mont Saint-Michel in France. This place is basically the poster child for islands that love to play hide-and-seek with the ocean. Mont Saint-Michel sits in a bay that experiences one of the most extreme tidal ranges in Europe. We're talking about tides that can vary by up to 15 meters, which is roughly 49 feet. To put that in perspective, that's about the height of a 5-story building. Imagine watching water levels rise and fall by the height of an entire apartment complex twice a day. It's absolutely bonkers. The causeway that connects Mont Saint-Michel to the mainland during low tide can become submerged underwater, moving at speeds of up to 6 kilometers per hour during high tide. That might not sound fast, but trust me, if you're caught out there trying to race back to shore, you're gonna have a really bad time. In fact, the tides here are so notorious that locals have a saying that they come in at the speed of a galloping horse. And speaking of having a bad time, Mont Saint-Michel has been the site of countless tragedies over the centuries. Historical records are filled with stories of pilgrims, merchants, and unfortunate travelers who misjudged the tides and found themselves trapped as the water rushed in around them. Some got lucky and made it to higher ground. Others, well, let's just say the bay has claimed more than its fair share of victims over the years. The medieval monks who built the famous abbey on top of the island weren't just choosing a scenic location, they were creating a natural fortress that became virtually impregnable twice a day. Any army attempting to lay siege would have to time their assault perfectly with the tides, making it one of the most defensible positions in all of medieval Europe. So what exactly causes these extreme tidal phenomena? Well, buckle up, because the science is actually pretty fascinating. As you probably learned in school, tides are primarily caused by the gravitational pull of the moon on Earth's oceans. But what makes certain locations experience such dramatic tidal ranges while others barely see any difference at all? The answer lies in something called tidal amplification, and it's one of nature's coolest party tricks. When tidal waters enter a bay or inlet that gradually narrows and becomes shallower, something remarkable happens. The same volume of water that was spread out over a wide area in the open ocean gets funneled into an increasingly confined space. Basic physics tells us that water has to go somewhere, so it does the only thing it can. It goes up. Think of it like squeezing a water balloon. The water inside doesn't disappear, it just redistributes itself, creating pressure and height. In the case of places like Mont Saint-Michel, the Bay of Fundy in Canada, or the Severn Estuary in the UK, this funneling effect is so extreme that it creates some of the highest tides on Earth. But there's more to it than just a narrowing bay. The truly massive tidal ranges occur when several factors align perfectly. You need the right shape of coastline, the right depth of water, the right angle of the seabed, and even the right relationship between the frequency of the tides and the natural resonance of the bay itself. It's kind of like pushing someone on a swing. If you time your pushes perfectly with the swing's natural rhythm, you can get them going really high with minimal effort. The ocean does the same thing in these locations, with each tide building on the momentum of the last, creating these absolutely massive fluctuations in water level. Now, you might be wondering, what kind of crazy creatures actually live in a place that can't decide whether it wants to be land or sea? Well, prepare to have your mind blown, because the ecosystems that develop in these tidal zones are some of the most productive and diverse on the entire planet. The area that gets covered and uncovered by the tides twice a day is called the intertidal zone, and it's basically a boot camp for marine life. Any organism that wants to survive here needs to be tough as nails, because they're dealing with some pretty extreme conditions. During low tide, these creatures are exposed to air, direct sunlight, temperature fluctuations, and the risk of dehydration. 6 hours later, they're completely underwater, dealing with waves, currents, and aquatic predators. It's like having to adapt to living in both the desert and the deep sea on the same day every single day. Take barnacles, for example. These little guys might look like simple lumps stuck to rocks, but they're actually incredibly sophisticated survivors. When the tide goes out, barnacles seal themselves up in their shells, creating a tiny fortress that keeps moisture in and predators out. They can survive for hours in this dormant state, basically holding their breath while they wait for the ocean to return. When the tide comes back in, boom! They spring into action. Their feathery legs emerge from their shells and start sweeping through the water, filtering out microscopic food particles. It's estimated that some barnacle species can filter up to 20 liters of water per day. That's over 5 gallons of water processed by an organism smaller than your thumbnail. Then you've got mussels, which have developed what might be one of nature's most impressive adhesives. These shellfish produce byssal threads, also known as beard threads, that are so strong and sticky that scientists have been studying them for years, trying to recreate the formula for medical and industrial applications. Each thread is about the diameter of a human hair, but a single mussel can produce dozens of them, creating an anchor system that can withstand the force of waves crashing over them twice a day. The adhesive at the base of these threads works underwater, in salt water, and maintains its strength even when exposed to air. Try getting superglue to do that. And then there are the birds. Oh man, the birds. Tidal islands and mudflats are like all-you-can-eat buffets for shorebirds, and they know it. During low tide, these areas become exposed, revealing vast populations of worms, crustaceans, mollusks, and other invertebrates that have been hiding beneath the sand and mud. Birds like curlews, oystercatchers, and sandpipers have evolved specialized beaks that are perfectly adapted for probing into the substrate to extract their prey. Some species have beaks that are straight and pointed for stabbing. Others have curved bills for reaching into burrows. And some even have sensitive nerve endings at the tips of their beaks that can detect the movements of hidden prey. The timing is crucial too. These birds have to work fast during the few hours of low tide to consume enough calories to sustain them until the next feeding opportunity. Some species can eat up to 40% of their body weight in a single low tide feeding session. Imagine having to eat 70 pounds of food in 4 hours if you're a 175-pound human. That's the kind of eating challenge these birds face regularly. Of course, humans being humans, we couldn't resist the challenge of living on or near these vanishing islands. And let me tell you, it's created some absolutely fascinating cultural adaptations over the centuries. For ancient sailors and navigators, tidal islands were both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, they could provide temporary shelter, fresh water, and a place to make repairs during low tide. On the other hand, if you mistimed your departure or didn't know the local tidal patterns, you could easily find your ship stranded on a mudflat, or worse, smashed against rocks by incoming tides. There are countless historical accounts of ships running aground on tidal islands or in tidal estuaries. One of the most famous examples involves the Spanish Armada in 1588. After their failed invasion of England, many Spanish ships were wrecked while trying to navigate the treacherous tidal waters around the British Isles. The combination of unfamiliar tides, storms, and damaged vessels proved catastrophic. Even today, with all our modern technology, GPS systems, and tide prediction software, tidal islands continue to pose challenges. Emergency services near major tidal areas regularly have to rescue tourists who ignore warning signs and find themselves cut off by rapidly rising tides. In the UK alone, coastal rescue teams respond to hundreds of calls each year from people stranded on tidal islands or mudflats. Some of these rescues involve dramatic helicopter evacuations as people cling to rocks with water rising around them. Despite multiple warning signs, educational campaigns, and even automatic sirens that sound before dangerous tide conditions, people continue to underestimate just how quickly and dramatically these tides can change. But there are also communities that have learned to live in harmony with these dramatic tidal changes. Fishermen in areas with extreme tides have developed unique techniques that take advantage of the tidal cycles. In some regions, they build elaborate fish traps that capture fish during high tide and hold them in shallow pools when the water recedes, making harvesting incredibly easy. In parts of Asia, entire systems of aquaculture had been developed around tidal patterns. Oyster farms, for example, are often located in intertidal zones, where the twice-daily exposure to air and water actually produces superior oysters with better flavor and texture than those grown in continuously submerged conditions. Now, before you start thinking that tidal islands are just cool geological curiosities, let me hit you with some environmental facts that really highlight why these places are so critically important to our planet's health. Tidal mudflats and salt marshes associated with tidal islands are absolute champions when it comes to carbon sequestration. We're talking about ecosystems that can capture and store carbon at rates up to 40 times greater than tropical rainforests on a per-area basis. The reason for this incredible efficiency lies in the unique chemistry of these environments. The constant cycle of submersion and exposure creates conditions where organic matter gets buried in sediment rapidly and then preserved in oxygen-poor conditions that slow decomposition. This means carbon that gets locked away in these sediments can stay there for centuries or even millennia. Scientists estimate that tidal wetlands globally store somewhere between 4.5 and 87 billion tons of carbon. To put that in perspective, that's roughly equivalent to the emissions from global fossil fuel burning for anywhere from 6 months to 11 years, all locked away in these coastal zones. Tidal areas also serve as critical nursery habitats for countless marine species. Many fish and crustacean species that we rely on for food spend their juvenile stages in these protected intertidal zones before moving out to deeper waters as adults. The constant mixing of nutrients, the protection from large predators, and the abundance of food make these areas perfect for young marine life to grow and develop. Studies have shown that some commercially important fish species produce 10 to 100 times more juveniles per area of habitat in tidal wetlands compared to other coastal ecosystems. And here's something that's becoming increasingly important as climate change drives more extreme weather events. Tidal islands and their associated wetlands act as natural buffers against storm surges and coastal erosion. The vegetation in salt marshes can reduce wave energy by up to 70%, while the complex topography of tidal mudflats causes waves to break and dissipate before they reach the mainland. It's estimated that these natural coastal defenses prevent billions of dollars in property damage annually, not to mention the countless lives they protect during extreme weather events. Speaking of climate change, you're probably wondering how rising sea levels and changing ocean conditions are affecting these vanishing islands. Well, the answer is complicated and unfortunately not entirely encouraging. As global sea levels rise, many low-lying tidal islands are experiencing longer periods of submersion. Some that were once accessible during most low tides are now only reachable during the very lowest spring tides. Others have disappeared entirely, transforming from islands that vanished at high tide to permanent submerged features. The rate of sea level rise is accelerating too. Current projections suggest we could see increases of anywhere from half a meter to over a meter by 2100, depending on how much we manage to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. For many tidal islands, particularly those in areas without extreme tidal ranges, this could mean complete and permanent inundation. But it's not just about the islands themselves. Remember all those incredible species that have adapted to life in the intertidal zone? They're facing a crisis too. As sea levels rise, these organisms need to migrate landward to maintain their position relative to the tides. The problem is that in many locations, human development has created barriers that prevent this natural migration. Seawalls, buildings, roads, and other infrastructure block the inland movement of tidal wetlands, creating what's called coastal squeeze. Essentially, these ecosystems get trapped between rising seas on one side and immovable barriers on the other, with nowhere to go. But it's not all doom and gloom. Coastal managers and conservation organizations around the world are working on strategies to protect and restore tidal islands and wetlands. Managed realignment projects, where coastal defenses are deliberately breached or moved inland to allow wetlands to migrate, are showing promising results in several countries. There are also efforts to better understand and monitor these ecosystems using cutting-edge technology. Satellite imagery, drone surveys, and sophisticated computer modeling are helping scientists track changes in tidal island geography and predict how these systems might respond to future conditions. Before we wrap up, I want to highlight some of the most extreme and fascinating tidal islands from around the world. Because trust me, Mont Saint-Michel isn't the only place where land plays disappearing acts. The Bay of Fundy in Canada holds the world record for the highest tides, with ranges that can exceed 16 meters or about 53 feet. That's even more extreme than Mont Saint-Michel. The amount of water that flows in and out of this bay during each tide cycle is greater than the combined flow of all the world's freshwater rivers. There are several tidal islands in the Bay of Fundy, and the speed at which the tide comes in is legitimately terrifying. At certain locations, the tidal bore, a wave of water that rushes in at the start of the flood tide, can travel at speeds of up to 13 kilometers per hour and reach heights of several meters. Lindisfarne, also known as Holy Island off the coast of Northumberland in England, is another spectacular example. This island has been inhabited since ancient times and was the site of one of the most important monasteries in medieval Britain. The tidal causeway to Lindisfarne is only passable for a few hours each day, and the local authorities maintain refuge boxes on stilts along the route. These boxes are exactly what they sound like: elevated platforms where people who get caught by the rising tide can climb up and wait for rescue. The fact that these exist and are regularly used tells you everything you need to know about how seriously these tides need to be taken. In South Korea, there's a phenomenon involving Jindo Island that's so dramatic it's been dubbed the Moses Miracle. Once a year, during the lowest spring tides, a natural pathway approximately 2.8 kilometers long and 40 meters wide appears between Jindo and the nearby island of Modo. For about an hour, people can walk across this exposed seabed, and it's become such a famous event that it's celebrated with an annual festival. Tens of thousands of people gather to walk the sea road before it vanishes again beneath the waves. So there you have it, the incredible story of islands that vanish every night and the amazing science behind them. These places remind us that nature doesn't always fit into neat, permanent categories. Sometimes land is sea, and sea is land, and the boundary between them is as fluid as the tides themselves. What makes tidal islands so fascinating isn't just their disappearing act, though that's certainly cool. It's the way they've created entire ecosystems adapted to this constant state of change. It's the way they've shaped human history and culture in coastal regions. And it's the critical role they play in our planet's environmental health. As we face the challenges of climate change and rising sea levels, these vanishing islands serve as both a warning and an inspiration. They show us how dynamic and adaptable nature can be, while also reminding us that even the most resilient ecosystems have their limits. The next time you're at a beach and you notice the tide coming in or going out, take a moment to appreciate the incredible forces at work. And maybe, if you ever get the chance, visit one of these vanishing islands yourself. Just make sure you check the tide tables first, because trust me, you do not want to be that person who needs to be helicopter rescued because they thought they could outrun a galloping tide. Thanks for reading, and until next time, keep exploring the amazing world around us. Just maybe bring a tide chart with you when you do.